You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
These are the highlights of the news today, Monday the 25th of June. Judge places restraining order on Labour Councillor for harassment. Coach driver chases down illegal immigrant from France. Spanish Euro crisis deepens. Germany tells Greece to tighten its belt and stop asking for help. Turkey is furious with Syria over shot plane. Libya's ex-Prime Minister extradited from Tunisia back to Libya. The extreme Muslim Brotherhood wins in Egypt's elections. Thought for the day, our green and pleasant land, oh dear. Finally, Lonesome George is deceased, gone, no longer a tortoise. UK news. A judge has placed a 5-year restraining order on a Labour Party councillor for harassing a woman. Labour councillor Thomas Lawton, 21, received the order at the North Staffordshire Magistrates Court for texting messages to a Melissa Hampton. He was charged with harassment after sending a series of text messages after he had already been warned not to do so. The order, which will be enforced until 2017, bars Mr Lawton from contacting Miss Hampton directly or indirectly, in person, by phone or electronically. Mr Lawton, who represents Silverdale and Parkside on Newcastle Borough Council, has now resigned from chairing the authority's Labour group. A brave coach driver chased after a Sudanese illegal immigrant who hid underneath his coach carrying British schoolchildren. Apparently the Sudanese hid under the coach whilst they filled up with petrol in Calais on a trip to France. The illegal dodged through different checkpoints on the way until apprehended by the coach driver at a service station in Northampton. He is now in custody, awaiting deportation. Euronews. The Spanish have got themselves so deep into the euro crisis that they have asked for aid to help prop up their failed banking system. Spanish Economy Minister Luis Guindos has asked for €100 billion or £80 billion loan in a letter to Jean-Claude Juncker. This request comes as German Chancellor Angela Merkel has been criticised for leading Europe in the wrong direction over her resistance to a banking union and stimulus measures. Germany has slammed its fist down on the table at Greece. The Greeks have now been told by the Germans to stop asking for bailouts and start cutting their budgets. This unbelievable statement came after the 5th year of recession for Greece. This is added to by the fact that the new Prime Minister, Antonis Samaras, 61, has undergone surgery for a detached retina and will not be able to travel to Brussels for a critical EU summit. Greece has been dependent since 2010 from 2 IMF loans for which it imposed rigorous cuts. Anti-bailout parties made huge gains in the May and June elections, but unemployment has already spiralled to above 22%. World news. Turkey is furious with Syria over claims that the Syrian military shot down one of its jets. The Turkish Air Force jet was said to be a reconnaissance aircraft and had no weapons on board. Other countries such as China are trying to stop mounting troubles escalating in the region. A World at 8 reporter has commented, "Any country that sends a reconnaissance aircraft over another country currently going through the internal troubles Syria is having is frankly asking for it." Colonel Gaddafi's Prime Minister has been extradited back to his home country of Libya by the Tunisian authorities this weekend. Al-Baghdadi al-Mahmoudi is said to be one of the first officials of the Gaddafi era to be booted out of Tunisia. The extreme Muslim Brotherhood has won the elections with the chairman of its Freedom and Justice Party, FJP, Mohamed Morsi, who is now President-elect. The 60-year-old engineer took 24% of the vote in the first round of the elections in May, with second place going to Ahmad Shafiq, former Air Force chief who served briefly as former President Hosni Mubarak's last Prime Minister. Mr Morsi promises to bring stability, security, justice and prosperity after a year of political upheaval. He has also said it is time to put into practice the Brotherhood's famous slogan, "Islam is the solution," and described its policy plans as having a moderate Islamic reference. A World at 8 writer has commented that a government with such extreme views will have a negative influence on future tourism to Egypt, and the fate of the many Egyptian artefacts may come into question. After all, it was the Europeans who first excavated the tombs and uncovered the glories of ancient Egypt, when Islam had virtually erased these monuments not buried by the sand. In Karnak, at the top of one of the huge walls, is a small mosque which was built on top of the temple at Karnak when Karnak was buried hundreds of feet down. Will this be their fate again under Sharia law? Thought for the day. This thought is a conglomeration of thoughts on paper headings and the way us British are herded like sheep into the right thoughts, the right deeds and the right actions. I mean this in a sarcastic way, of course. For the last few weeks the general population of England have been monitored, mesmerised and generally written off under the guise of football. I have never seen so much British paraphernalia in all my life. It has almost replaced food but never booze in the supermarkets, red, white and blue tat. Makes me almost ashamed to be British when the only time we Brits are seen to be proud of our country is when a frankly multicoloured team are pushing a sodding ball round a field. Now this is the wrong shaped ball for me, I'm afraid. I do prefer rugger. The players are more hunky and the game more interesting to me, but never mind. If only we could have flags flying from houses and cars during the normal course of the year, it would be good, as they do in the US. No one is ashamed of their flag over there, yet. Now amidst all this glory, poor old England lost to Italy. Football, that is, not the last war. Well, if you pay the bloody men huge amounts of money, regardless of whether they play well or not, one rather loses the incentive to win, doesn't one? Our guys, and I use the word very loosely, are given the lifestyle of the gods for a few goals. I hope we are not the only country to pay our players vast amounts of cash, but if we are, then therein lies the answer. Pay them for the games they win, and not the ones they lose, as it was in the good old days. It is a sport, not a job. They are not lifesavers, they are not surgeons or doctors, they are not lawyers or judges, scientists or writers, artists or actors. They kick balls around fields, whilst other people who could help this country are out of work. Zero tolerance, I'm afraid, on this one. Sport was a wonderful thing. It was taught in all schools in one form or another, but of course there were the boys who simply did not have the backing or money, and that was sad. But I would rather have that than what we have now. There is too much money invested in football, especially over here. Cut their salaries and see their playing improve. Whilst mulling over footy, I saw that Cameron is socially engineering again. He plans to cut welfare benefits for the jobless who have more than 3 children. Now on the face of it this looks good, until you see what's going on. These jobless could also be kicked off the dole after 2 years. Now, having been jobless myself when I had 3 children and a mortgage many years ago, I know that I only had 3 months of £17.50 per week before it stopped. I got a job, mainly because that small amount of money was not enough to keep us all, but then jobs were easier and I did have qualifications. Nowadays jobs are difficult to find and they are getting worse. The phrasing I do not like is jobless. Now it could refer to the generations of white people in certain areas who have been jobless for many years, because firstly there are no jobs and secondly they are undereducated and undermotivated. And yes, they do produce children. It could also refer to a man who has several children and a job. He loses that job and is unable to get another. He probably is white, has a mortgage and his wife may well be working as well. What happens to them? They are penalised for losing a job and after 2 years what benefits they have left are taken. Now this makes for a huge impact socially on white working and middle class parents. If taken literally, it will curb the white population, which, let's face it, is curbed already. People falling in and out of marriages, high white abortion rates and at least 4 generations of children who frankly do not seem to want to procreate their own kind at all. This will contribute hugely to the gradual elimination of the British family system. Now that will please the establishment. Also, will this piece of enlightenment be passed on to our ethnic brothers? Will the limit of 3 children per jobless guy apply to the hordes of Arabs, Asians and Africans we currently entertain on this island? Well, the Indians and Pakistanis usually run some kind of family business or marry into whatever, and they are well known for their business acumen. Whilst moving drugs and prostitutes, they get their sons educated enough to take on the previously white professional jobs. So this no job, no kids edict will not apply to them. The Nepalese and their thousands are busy in the care homes, restaurants and supermarkets of the nation, so will feel free to breed. The newly arrived Africans get similar jobs under the race card, so they will breed as usual. In fact, the Kenyan down the road from me started off life down here with 2 children and has now acquired 2 more from Africa, and she drives a Mercedes, a new one. The Chinese always operate their own country within any country and are left alone. So I think we can take this as applying mainly to the indigenous Brits who, if not out of work now, soon will be. What fun. So social engineering has proved too slow, and so now we have financial engineering. We already have culture engineering, immigration, religious engineering, Muslim immigration, social and sexual engineering, drink laws and abortion laws, plus the downgrading of our agricultural and fisheries structure thanks to the EU. Our education structure went long ago, and now we have the financial engineering for our poor white population. With luck, this government will pass the message on. Get a poorly paid job, provided it doesn't take a job away from an immigrant. Don't marry, don't have children, keep smoking and drinking, it pays the establishment. Drive a car and buy a house, but do not expect to keep the house. What a picture for our children to work to. Oh, and I forgot, pay your taxes, because this country likes to send your money abroad to countries that all the immigrants who come here are from in the first place. That is when they're not shoring up the sodding Commonwealth countries and Europe. In fact, the Queen could do something useful in her life, and that is dissolving the Commonwealth. It only consists of a handful of foreigners whose countries make a great contribution to the Crown. Of what, you may ask? People are the answer here. Hordes of them, coming in all the time. Cancel the Commonwealth and their passports. Another thing the Queen is doing, apparently, is shaking the hand of Martin McGuinness, the right-hand man of good old Jerry in the IRA. Well, although I do have some Irish blood, O'Brien, the subject of Ireland is very hairy. Oliver Cromwell was a complete bastard over there, and the British and the potato famine did not shine. If I was Irish, I would not like the incursion of red-headed Scots Protestants into my land any more than I like the Muslims and others into Britain. Countries should be united, especially if they are islands. Not much room for boundaries, is there? I do not approve of the way the IRA attained their status, having been on the run in the 70s in 1 week from 3 of the bombs that went off around Aldershot, well, knowing the Irish 2 went off and the 3rd failed. However, not a pleasant time. But for her to shake his hand is disgraceful. I have a lot of time for the royals, but she lets her people down every time. Now, if this was a Sharia state, give the Muzzies their due, and if McGuinness had blown up one of theirs, as in poor Lord Mountbatten, they would have chopped his head off, not shaken his hand. The latest bit of nonsense in human rights is that we are giving asylum to a Taliban fighter who wants protection from the Taliban. Oh yes, it gets better. Zareen Ahmadzai arrived in Britain illegally in May 2010 after travelling from Afghanistan in lorries, petrol obviously not being a problem. So between the Human Rights Act and a senior immigration judge, Jonathan Perkins, and a psychologist, this Taliban fighter is free to live anywhere in Britain. Although according to the Mail, no one does know where he lives, probably because he is being protected from the other Taliban bastards who are over here in their droves just waiting for the day of jihad. A wall and a Kalashnikov, I think. Certainly save some money to put towards our white jobless guys. And finally, Lonesome George, the 100-year-old giant tortoise, has passed away. The main attraction at the Galapagos Islands National Park passed away during the weekend and has upset the keepers who looked after him. 180,000 visitors came to the national park to see some of the rarest animals on the planet. Charles Darwin formed his theories of evolution on the Galapagos Islands in the 19th century. The park is now considered having Lonesome George embalmed, so that future visitors may still see George in the park. There are many thousands of giant tortoises still dotted around the globe, but none as famous as George. This presenter says, if there are so many giant tortoises, why couldn't they bring a female by for George? No animal should live alone, poor old George. Let us hope he has gone to the big tortoise park in the sky with lots of female tortoises, rather like an Islamic paradise for tortoises. You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I wish you all a very good night.